Hello everybody and welcome to the opening talk of Art Lobby at Art 40 Basel. We are very happy and proud having Jonas and Hwan here. And just let me say a few words before they start with the conversation. Jonas, New York-based artist, is widely known in the art scene, especially as a pioneer of video and performance art. Also, Hwan is based in New York, and he recently had a solo exhibition at the Witte David in Rotterdam, and now there is this catalogue published, very nice catalogue, and they will do the signing after the talk. And there is also a dialogue between the two artists in the catalogue, and they do have a collaborate project at Wilkinson Gallery in the booth hall too. And now we all look forward to hearing the conversation of the two artists, Conversations B, A Room and the Nervous System. Thank you, Jonas and Hwan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that your title, Sung?
No, it's not my title, but
Oh, it
was titled
A
that
Room
way.
of the Nervous System.
I think it was
on
based on
Michael
this.
Tausig.
That's right,
Yeah.
yeah. No, before you mentioned the Michael, it was based on the conversation we had.
I
and
see.
I think it,
Yes.
yeah.
We thought we'd first just briefly touch on how we met, which was when I taught a class at Harvard, I think it was about 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah, and Sung took the class, and that's when I met Sung.
Yeah.
And what's your memory of that?
Well, I was studying in Williams, and I was studying mathematics, and I wanted to take some film classes, and Harvard has a very amazing film department there. So I went there. I had no idea about the contemporary art or the video art or you, and I just happened to take a class, and that's how I met you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the friendship continued through Sung going to MIT and then the Rijksacademy, and where I teach, both places where I taught. And one thing we thought we'd start out with how each of us started, the comparative situations of young artists beginning to work in the world, in this system, the art world. And when I began, it was quite a different situation, as many of you know. We were not taught in school what we do now. We were not taught video art. I studied art history and sculpture, and worked, when I went to the museum school in Boston, worked in clay from the model. But I think the one thing I learned in all that was how to look. And also, the one practice that I continue from that time is drawing. And the idea of sculpture, and I think sculpture itself has changed in its definitions and forms to be more four-dimensional, including the element of time. And so when I began in the 60s to actually work in public, myself and other artists were interested in breaking the idea of forms, of the form of a single medium, and in a cross-medium approach, and also for myself, a cross-cultural approach to refer to other cultures in my work. And so it was a very exciting time, and one felt that this new medium, which is the video camera, which was one of the elements, was like a new tool. And I remember John Baldessari referred to it as a pencil. So in a way, it was just another step, another device for looking and transforming the image. And what was your experience with that same device coming from mathematics?
For me, when I was in Korea, I was studying architecture in college, and I never I never thought about becoming an artist. I didn't have the access. I didn't really go see the. I mean, I did go see the museums and see the works, but I was not really. I didn't have the knowledge of it, and the way that I was introduced to art was through school. So it was a very different, maybe. Experience. It was not by choice. It really happened as I was taking different classes, and as I was a math major, I got more interested. I always liked film, so I was watching a lot of films, and it was in a way trying things out. And even when I went to MIT to study with you, I was interested in the idea of storytelling and how I can use different kinds of medium. I was taking literature classes or film and video performance, whatever I can, to make different kind of storytelling that is mine. So that's how.
But when you began to work out, when you left school, and talk a little bit about the Rijksacademy and how different. Because we were saying also that, for instance, Sung, you asked me about being in an art world in New York. So for me and all my contemporaries, I think we really learned, you could say, in the street. I did about contemporary art and about how to work in that world, and not in school. So, but there's another way for young artists to be in a context, and I wondered if you could talk about that.
Well, Rijksacademy was very interesting for me and for other people that I know, because it was there was a school context, but there were no classes really, and there were people from there. Half of the people who are there are from the Netherlands, and the other half are from all over the world, and you could see how different artists come from very different approach to art. I have a friend who got to know art only through looking at magazines, because they didn't have access to the museums, for example. So what was interesting to me was that it was kind of like a residency format where it was long-term for 2 years, and you get to really sort of understand the place where you're living in. So it's not like a visiting residency where you go there and produce a work and leave. You can stay there and you can make contact, you can have a dialogue with the people, and we still do talk with the people that I met there. So it was a very important place for me. And by being in New York right now, I feel very different, because I really went there without having any kind of context. I went there because I was interested in to be based there. I did everything myself with visas and everything. So well, I just moved there a year ago. I'm still learning about it by being in New York.
So in a way, art school, I think one of the uses of art school is the networking. What do you think? I mean,
yes, I think so. I think the institution works in as a place where you, for example, for a person like me, that's how I got to meet all these people, my friends who are artists. And yes,
I mean, besides working with various artists as your, the advisors.
Yeah.
It's meeting other young artists from all over the world.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, is that in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't such an international community, although there was international, one knew about what was going on in Brazil and Japan and Europe, but it wasn't so close at hand the way it is now. People travel much more.
Mm.
But let's talk about, if you want, why the different reasons why we're both working with the medium of performance. What attracted you to work in this medium?
I think the first time that I really thought about performance, to use performance as a medium, was to control more the environment where I show my film. Actually, I was thinking that the first performance I did was in the room 3, where it was about 40-minute performance, and in the middle of it I show my video, which is about 8 minutes. And it was in a way to make the right environment before and after, because the video is a concentrated form, but there are other things that I want to sort of talk about. And I was excited about the idea of also being in a direct contact with the people who are seeing the work. Then you make the work, and then you're sort of separate from the audience who sees the work. And I think performance, to me, it's just like also a different way of developing your piece, I think. I work in a very different way when I have a space and you, than when I'm, for example, making a film. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that because it's about, for you, it's about a little bit, it was a little bit about how to develop your audience and how to control how to attract an audience and how to show your work within that context of your own structure of the audience. But for me, it was, well, I went into performance because I was inspired in the 60s by seeing happenings by various visual artists like Oldenburg and Rauschenberg and the collaborations between the artists and the dancers at that time. And it was a whole different world because the dancers and the artists were developing an idea of working with everyday gesture. And this was a period where people were breaking away from, say, the formality and stylization of Martha Graham for the dancers and other things for all the others, and working out of conventional spaces. There wasn't such a thing as installation art at that time, and so this was an area one could move into and have a great deal of freedom and also use many different, sound, movement, and space, and the material of time. And so I was beginning in a time when it was a kind of, it's not a new thing in the art world. Performance has existed in different ways, and the surrealists, the Dadaists, the futurists all used performative ideas, but so it re-entered the art world at that time in a different way. And I think, and then for me, just the sheer, I just loved I loved performing because I could suddenly invent things through my body, through the use of my body in relation to objects in space and time. And when I started, I really tried to break away from what was going on at the time and to develop my own language. And there were two influences and forms that I used and still relate to: film and literature. Literature being a form of storytelling and also a structure, the structure of poetry, and also the structure of film. And also, I was interested in early filmmaking. And so the structure of film, the idea of the edit, the cut, the use of material by film, and the comparison of the video camera, which was a totally new tool and looked totally different from what it is now, to the use of film and how the film camera operates. So now, if I think about your work and your context, it's also interesting because you're from Korea. You relate very much to the films that are coming out of Asia, which is a very interesting and strong development in the last 20 years. It's been going on much longer than that, but so I think that's also had a big effect on you. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because you have a different relation to film at a different time.
Well, I think film too, I think maybe I want to talk in terms of the storytelling, because and this notion of the storyteller who, in the old days, before all this media, video or film or news media, the person who delivers the news from another foreign land and then tells a story, basically, and you have to sort of believe him because he's the only one who's been there. And I like this idea of the storyteller, and we have information everywhere, from the newspaper, from the books, and from watching television, all these different sources, but I was interested in how you can, out of these sources, you can make some kind of your individual, personal way of associating with the story, and I think of that as kind of like a news, where you're creating your own news, and you can use different medium. And film, to me, is one of those things. And I always watch film. That's how I enter, actually. That's how I met you as well. So it was I learned the device that I use a lot of times in terms of my work is I learned from film. How the relationship between directors and the actors, or relation between the film image, the final product, and the script, the text of the image form, and how you use sound and how editing works, things like this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, why don't you ask me a question? No, but Sung and I have very nice. In the book, there's a nice conversation. I enjoy this exchange with Sung, and it's different in a formal situation like this.
Yeah,
and,
especially when there's this echo
yeah.
of your voice.
This microphone is very weird.
I wrote down some questions. Yeah, we wanted to talk about a little bit about how you develop your work through performance and exhibitions. Because I think one of the things that, as I was making, some of my works take longer time than the period between the exhibitions, or you cannot just go to the space and just do the performance because it has layer. Sometimes it's choreographed, sometimes you need rehearsal, sometimes you have to think about the space. So I was wondering about your way of developing your work during these exhibitions. And
well, often if you do the kind of work I do, I can't always set it up and produce it in my studio. It involves a lot of complex things, so I take advantage of being invited places to do a show or to do a performance to develop my work. And so the work has a kind of organic changing development from one situation to another. So it never really has, it does have a finished form. This microphone is whistling. It does have a finished form, but for instance, the last piece, Reading Dante, that's in the Venice Biennale, I didn't have any support for that piece. I just started working on it. And so I worked on it and I developed it in the different places that I was invited to do a workshop, or where I go in the summer. And then I was invited to go to Mexico by Uta, actually. And when I went to Mexico, I asked Carlos Amarales if he knew of a good location for Dante. And Carlos told me about this fantastic monument, modernist monument in Mexico City. And so I developed a large part of the piece depends on that location. And so I feel, and also I love Mexico. So Mexico became a kind of, I was very interested in representing Dante, having Dante represented in different cultures, not just a Northern European situation, and having other gods in it besides what's referred to in the Dante text. In other words, translating it to other cultures. And so that's, so it was set up in various different situations, and then finally in its present form. But we said we would open the floor to questions. It's
is it already
10 minutes, do you think? Or do you want to say something else about that? And I have to say, Sung's book, there's a little section where Sung came to my loft in New York, and it was a very nice experience because he told me to get my objects and some of my favorite books, to get them out and put them on the table, and we'd talk about them. And it was a very nice way of having a conversation. And yeah, that was very nice, Sung, that idea to do that.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about the personal objects that you use in your work. I was curious about how, because you don't really put it out there, make it known that some of the objects that you use are personal objects, but once you make it, when you tie the knots with other reference that is outside of your personal life, it becomes something else. So I wonder how you feel about that.
If I begin to work on a piece, sometimes I just get out a lot of books and open them up and start collecting little fragments from the books. Or I collect objects, either directly in relationship to a theme, or just because I like to go to flea markets and collect objects. And in the beginning, I made a kind of language out of the juxtaposition of these objects. And so they transform depending on the context. They're transformed. And you do somewhat similar. You work with objects also.
Yeah, but not just objects, but my also personal stories.
And your personal stories, yeah.
So.
Are there any questions? We thought, yeah.
Say something. In both of your works, also sound plays an important element, is an important element. So it's the performative, but it's also the sonic. Can you say a little bit about that? Because I see that shared also in your work.
Well, first time actually, I didn't say that, but first time I made a performance, it was in this place called Stein. And it's a place in Amsterdam where they want to connect the visual artists and the sound artists. And I was interested in that space because when I go to concerts, the audience have different way of receiving information than the way that they do in films or in the museums or when you're reading books. So I was interested in the change of gear that people have in different space, and before you see the work, they already have a different kind of attitude toward the medium that they're going to look at. So I was interested in working with a musician, David Michael de Gregorio, where he was sort of like a mask or a translator of some of my stories. So some of the stories that I have are being translated into another form, which is music. And I mean, sound and music is different, but that's one way that I related to sound. Yeah.
Well, I started using sound from the very beginning, and at first it was very simple sound of the space or very simple percussive sounds that I would make with stones or spoons on the mirror. And then gradually I started adding musical fragments. And the first one I used was a piece of reggae music in this piece called Organic Honey. And it inspires me, music and sound inspire me in the performance. If I'm performing myself, it gives me ideas about movements, and it adds a content for myself and a way of reinterpreting the text and the situation. And then more and more, as I started working with stories, the soundtrack became a parallel and important element that I work with. I arrange all my own soundtracks, and even if I work with a composer, I integrate the music into the soundtrack. So the sound both is never just a background. It's a way of giving another dimension to the content of the text or the situation, and it's a spatial element. It's a situation. It's a sound that gives the space itself a certain kind of definite presence.
Also, the first film that I made actually when I went to MIT was called Adada, and it was a film about, it's not a film about stuttering, but I thought of film as that it was a 20-minute film as a film that stutters. And in that way, I was interested in not a coherent idea that can come out of a story, but that form of speech where it is broken off. And I learned a lot from music and the sound world when I listened to, from my friends when we listen to it, how they associate, how meaning, or even this talk, for example, in the bigger context of a lot of other talks that you see, it could be just like a segment. So depending on which scale you look into a meaning, it can become something that is just a part of a bigger structure, or you can just go into it and see the world within it. So that's something that.
What elements about a live audience do you consider? Do you hear me?
Pardon, what elements?
About a live audience do you consider when you make a performance? What is different, or what is accentuated when you're in front of a live audience in your work?
It's a direct contact with people. It's basically, I mean, you have no control over what the audience is going to be or who they are, unless you're in a context like this. I know that everybody's here to see the art fair, and usually, I sort of know my audience. In the beginning, the live audience was simply friends. All the friends were artists in New York or wherever one went. So it was a very familiar audience. And one knew that the audience would respond in a certain way, although one never knew exactly. And the audience can be totally dead. The audience, the audience can just have no reaction. You can feel a kind of deadness in the audience. So it's very important to have a relationship, and it feeds you back. The energy of the audience you can feel that feeds back into the situation of the performance. That's all I can say. I mean, it also depends if you do a terrible thing. Yes, you do a terrible performance. It's a terrible experience. But it gives energy back into the performance. But I think that depends a great deal on how much energy you give to the audience. It's a feeding back and forth. So the audience is a kind of neutral body, depending on what the situation is. But it can also be, in different countries, very different. Like the Italian audience, when I first performed in Italy, I noticed a lot of them talked all the way through the performance. Some of them did, not everybody. And other audiences were extremely critical, asking me what things mean, things like that. But those are more quirky situations.
For me, maybe I can talk about, for that, how, for example, if you're talking to a friend, if I'm just talking to you, I can, if there are nobody else here, I can talk about different things, and the way that I can tell stories become very different. And I think when you're talking to many people at the same time, for example, we're having a conversation, but not really a conversation. So I think there are things that you have to somehow translate, because there are some ideas or some kind of interior space. Within the interior space, there are stories it's not just about stories, but there are things that you want to communicate in a way. But if you have, depending on the space or how many audience, what kind of audience, what kind of culture, I do need to think about about the issue of translation, how to do that. Yeah. And that's something that when you have a live audience, make me think about. Yeah.
It's very exciting to have a live audience. It's very different than, it's much more scary to go to an opening if you're having a show it's also separate. You're also separated from the audience because you've formalized your actions. Not today, not here, but in a performance.
Hi. Joan, I heard you groping to describe, struggling to just describe happenings and things. I'm just wondering about the transitory nature of performance and how that makes you feel. That it's here and it's gone.
I think it makes everybody who enjoys to make those things, it's wonderful. It's a very magical, a moment that has no time. It's not the same kind of time experience that you have. And if it can be a terrible, if you do a bad performance, it can be humiliating, but it also is a very exhilarating kind of magical experience. And I think the reason I made videos was because I wanted to translate not that experience, but to translate the material into something that would survive. But you can never translate the experience of a performance. And so I tried to document early performances, and it made me very uncomfortable to see it because it didn't have the same feeling of the actual thing itself. So I do think, just in my experience, looking at, say, trying to get a feeling of, say, Japanese no, or Buto dancers that are very inspirational to me. Just seeing a 5-minute film of a certain Buto dancer can give me a great feeling about what that was and about this particular Buto dancer. So in a way, things can be they can be remembered and also experienced in a very different way, but there's something of the essence that can remain. Of course, a film and a video is also transitory. So.
How do your works on paper, your drawings, both of you, relate to your work? Are they records? Are they storyboards? What is the relationship between a work on paper and what you do?
Well, I'll just say briefly, I've been drawing ever since a long time. And they function in different ways. They either drawings made before the performance, and so they become icons in the performance that represent a certain aspect of the content of the performance. Every time I do a performance, I try to invent a new way of drawing in the context of the medium of performance, so the image is made not as a separate element, but as something that's an integral part of that action. And because I'm drawing in a certain situation, I draw in a different way, so I'm very interested in that. It produces slightly different drawings. I also draw outside of the context of performance, so I make drawings of, when I'm working on a piece, I make sketches and drawings of elements relating to the piece. And I've increased that activity more and more, so it's become a parallel, almost, almost as important as the performances, which are just part of my language now.
I mean, for me, similarly, I mean, I like to draw all the time, but I didn't choose drawing. Some of my videos, there are some videos that has nothing to do with drawing, for example, so some of my works, and but even when I'm doing that, it's a good way to, for me, think about the subject that I'm dealing with in different ways. And when I, for example, see your performance, I see it as the whole performance as if you're drawing, not like you're drawing inside the performance, but the performance itself is a drawing in making.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's interesting, depending on the scale that you use also different sizes of projections, and different people you can be drawing, but you can be also making some kind of movements. So that in that way, I think drawing helps me think about what I'm doing from a different perspective, you know. So that's how I relate to it.
Also, for me, drawing is a kind of ritual, and I think I was, at one point later, after I'd been drawing for a long time, I saw this unedited version of Maya Daren's footage that she shot in Haiti, and it was the same action over and over again of people drawing with white powder on the ground, these beautiful drawings, Haitian voodoo drawings, and that would be the kind of thing that would influence me, and how do I translate that into my own language in this present time in my culture. I've also once, I don't do that anymore, but once I used a drawing from the Moluccan Book of the Dead, which is a New Guinea tribe. It's called the Endless Drawing, and there's a whole series of these endless drawings that are done as you go from life to death, and you're supposed to know how to complete this drawing that's begun by the witch at the door of life to death. So for me, drawing also relates to that kind of ritual and relationship to life, I guess. And yeah, you're right. I think drawing is just a basic activity of art making.
Also, when I think drawing in the 2D form, in a still form, has something that is similar to how I relate to what is story, where it's like an architecture where a lot of information is in there. And you're doing, for example, when you're making a drawing, there are a lot of activities that is going on, but in the final product in a paper is this image. And it's like a word or some kind of ideogram, or I think story works in that way too. When I'm making a film, it deals with many different layers and different kinds of stories, but you can also make that into it has a story that is like a house where this experience lives in. That's one thing.
So there is time for one last question. Anybody? Okay, then thank you very much, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.